Montana. Thanks for joining me on the SteadFast Running podcast.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Thank you for having me.
You live in Rhode Island with your husband and son, Brady. Why don't you start off by telling us more about the running community where you live and what it's like to train there?
Yeah, so I'll say to start, I never thought I'd end up in Rhode Island. It's this tiny little state. We're tucked in along the ocean. It's obviously the smallest state, but it has a really vibrant running community, which is kind of neat and unexpected to me. So Ray Tracy's group trains here, and I've seen Molly Huddle out running. I've seen Emily Sisson out running, and it's yeah, it's just kind of like casually on a random weekday. It's pretty incredible. And obviously Providence College is here, where we've got Brown University here, where Molly Huddle's husband coaches at. So the Ocean State really packs its punch for being such a small state.
Yeah, I associate Rhode Island with Brown University and Coach Kurt Benninger,
Yep.
who I believe is now working with Marielle Hall, who is transitioning to the roads.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot going on in your home state. Now, in your case, Montana, you played softball growing up, and then in eighth grade, you ran a 550 mile in gym class, which
Mhm.
prompted you to join the cross country team. And then by 10th grade, you had joined the track team. And in 11th grade, you became a year round runner, adding indoor track to your resume. Walk us through the training that took you from being the slowest runner on your mile relay team to qualifying for nationals 3 times and running a 5:15 mile in high school.
Yeah, honestly, it's interesting you bring that up. My husband and I have talked a lot about how we want to handle sports with our kids. So I have my son Brady, and then we just added a daughter this fall as well. And we've talked a lot about, I mean, it's such a hyper competitive atmosphere now. Even more, I mean, it was starting to get that way as we were growing up, and it seems like it's just gotten. You're a PE teacher, I'm sure you see it all the time, and some of the kids you work with, but yeah, it's gotten so hyper competitive, and there's so much research on like delaying specialization of your kids. That's something that I'm super passionate about. And when I look at my career, not that I had, you know, the most stellar career out there, but I was able to progress every single year from middle school on up to high school and every single year through college. I ran a single season in eighth grade. I had an awesome coach. He kept I just ran cross country in eighth grade. He kept fun at the forefront. It was very informal. Like we were out jogging. We were out jogging every day, building the aerobic base, which we know is so important, but it was fun. We were chatting with our friends. There wasn't a ton of pressure. We gave it our all at meets, and, it was fun. Um, I continued to run just a single season of cross country my freshman year. Sophomore year of high school, I added in outdoor track. And then junior and senior year, I was running full time, which is pretty late, I think, compared to most high school runners, pretty late for kind of starting to run full time. And as an underclassman, I wasn't training really hard when I wasn't competing. So definitely had a lot of lifetime mileage left, which I think gave me some potential and some upside later in my high school career and into my college career. But yeah, what was my training like? So I would say I would say my coaches did a really good job at naturally progressing it and not putting a ton of pressure. I wasn't doing any kind of crazy mileage right from the get-go, but I progressed mileage every single year. I was definitely like, once I kind of found out what running was about, and learned more, I was a true student of the sport right from the get-go, which is carried into, me now becoming a coach and why I do what I do and why I love to do what I do. So I would say probably starting like my sophomore year of high school, like my coach, once he realized I had a big interest in this, he was passing me along like scientific journal articles and like his old subscriptions to like Running Times, which is now extinct. And runners run, just anything I could get my hands on. That was I was reading about Lydiard and Canova and everything I could read on from like the earliest age. So yeah, so I was a true student of the sport, and that definitely encouraged me to, again, just invest a little bit more mentally each year. I wanted to I wanted to continue to build mileage. I loved running mileage. And by the time I was a junior, I would say in college, I was running maybe 70, 75 miles a week. But I would say I started at maybe 25, 30 miles a week as a freshman in high school. And then again, as I was learning more and as I became a more mature athlete, just the intensity, I would say, also increased probably every single year.
Now, a 5:15 mile equates to right around 11:05 for 3,200 and 18:13 for 5,000. Did you have an equal amount of success in cross country or the 2 mile in high school?
Yeah, so high school, my 2 mile PR was 11:06, so right around there. And then I was fortunate enough, I love the 5K on the track. I got to run it at, so I qualified for nationals with my 2 mile time. And I loved every year that I was able to go to nationals and run the 5K on the track. I loved it. And that's how I knew going into college that I would love being a 5K and 10K runner. Obviously, there's not a lot of racing opportunities for the 5K on the track as a high school runner. But I did my senior year, I ran 18:35 on the track. So probably not quite as strong as maybe my mile or 2 mile time would suggest. But I think probably just goes to show I had still some more aerobic development work to do.
Yeah, and while we're still on the topic of high school running, do you have any general advice for coaches at that level? And I'm thinking mostly about the experience we provide kids in their developmental years and balancing the pressure to field a competitive team versus making sure that the kids don't lose their love for the sport by the time they graduate. And you kind of already started alluding to that with the whole idea of let's keep fun at the forefront.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's something so over COVID, I actually had the pleasure and the opportunity to work with a few high schoolers. I don't typically, as a online coach, as a private online coach and someone who works primarily with adult runners, I typically don't like to work with high schoolers because my preference is always if they have a team atmosphere. I just think that's so beneficial. I never want to get in the way of that. I never want to be like a private coach interfering with their team coaching. And I do think that the team atmosphere and them being a part of a team versus doing it by themselves just is so like enriching and helpful and important in so many ways for them at that age. But I had the opportunity over COVID to work with a small handful of high school runners who their seasons were canceled. And they wanted to, they had some natural talent. They wanted to continue to develop and get better. And they were looking for some guidance during that kind of weird time. And that got me thinking a lot about how to structure and progress high schoolers and how unique that age group is. And I did coach briefly at the high school level in between different coaching stints. So I had some of that experience as well. But yeah, I would say, I mean, it kind of aligns with my coaching philosophy as a whole. Like just because maybe you can handle a maximum, let's say, amount of work doesn't mean you should. Everything should be progressive. Don't skip a step. Don't get too far ahead of yourself just because, I mean, we are seeing a lot of, especially these super talented high schoolers training like essentially professionals now. I don't think that's a good model. I think, again, just kind of take it step by step. It should be a natural progression in terms of mileage and intensity. That's going to ensure that, while it's great to run fast in high school, we really want these kids. We want them to have upside. We want them, if they do want to go on to college, we want them to be able to continue to progress. We want them to be able to be healthy and running, have fulfilling, enriching running careers long beyond that, hopefully, if they want to continue on the roads. So yeah, I would say don't rush the development process. Don't get too far ahead of yourselves, and maybe kind of pushing back against some of this. While it's great to be a high schooler with big goals, pushing back against the idea that you have to train like a professional to be good at that level.
Did you attend college on a running scholarship?
I didn't. So I ran in the Patriot League. I ran at Bucknell, and I believe that they now have athletic scholarships, but they didn't at the time. So I was recruited and received essentially like a slot is what they called it, for running. Um, but I didn't receive, merit aid.
Okay, so you competed at Bucknell, and during your sophomore year in college, you went from 18:35 in the 5K to a 17:28, and then you sort of leveled off. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm curious about what you think led to that breakthrough your sophomore year and what happened afterwards.
Yeah, so my freshman year was a big adjustment period. I mean, it was an adjustment to the demands of it was an adjustment to just college period and being out on my own. Um, I felt like I was getting sick all the time. I was, just adjusting to the new academic demand, adjusting to the life demands of being a college athlete, especially a three-season college athlete, which, is so all encompassing. Come my sophomore year, I felt like in so many ways I just kind of got my feet under me. I remember leaving my freshman year, going home for the summer, and I mean I was really displeased with my. I felt like I had such great momentum coming out of high school, and I didn't live up to any of that my freshman year. So I was really fired up and motivated. Had I put in an awesome summer of base building. I especially really worked. Again, I did love mileage, so I knew I wanted to move the needle up with my mileage and was consistently averaging, I would say, about 10 miles per week more than I ever had during the summer. Once I got, a good base of consistent mileage under me, I remember the August before I reported for training camp. I was doing workouts I'd never been able to do before. And it was awesome to see things really start clicking. And that was the catapult that kind of drove my sophomore year and some big improvements in pretty much all distances. Leveled off a little bit my junior year. I had really, really low ferritin my junior year, which is something that I am now super passionate about and is something I push for testing with all of the adult and teen runners that I work with now. Um, that provided some interruptions my junior year. I also had a stress fracture then. Coming back my senior year, was able to refocus and had a really, really great cross country season my senior year, and we did a lot as a team. Cross country makes it a little bit tougher to kind of compare times, so it might not have, been the big flashy overall PR numbers, but had a really strong XC season my senior year, and then I was able to improve on my track times, but it was more slowly. It wasn't like a big breakthrough like it was my sophomore year.
Yeah, so apart from running more, increasing your volume, you mentioned you do like mileage. How else would you describe your training in college? Like the rhyme and the reason behind certain workouts or how your coach maybe structured things for you?
Yeah, one thing I liked, which actually, well, you can see a clear path in all of these. I mean, my running experiences in a large part shaped the way I coach now. So one thing I really liked that my college coach did was we touched on all the training intensities year round. Like we were touching speed, even in base building and cross country season, we were touching threshold work. We were touching obviously towards the end, we were doing more and more race pace specific work. But that's definitely something I've carried over and has been a big part of my now philosophy with my adult athletes, even my marathoners. Like we're touching speed. Steve Magnus always says, which I love, it's when you're starting from scratch with any particular training intensity, it's very difficult to build, say, speed or, build some of these other specific training intensities. It's much easier to maintain when you have built them. So obviously, like my marathoners that I train, we're not crushing 200 repeats all the time, or we're not crushing them as frequently, 200, 400 meter repeats as frequently as, or fast 200, 400 repeats, I should say, as much as like a 5K runner. But we're still doing some of that work and it still is sprinkled in. Because again, if someone wants to drop down to the 5K or the 10K, or some of those other distances at some point, they're going to have that momentum and it's going to be much easier to then kind of transition. But yeah, I would say that was a big cornerstone of his philosophy, something that definitely helped me improve. But um, I found I definitely found in college through a couple injury stints that I was someone who could handle mileage more so than intensity. So I had to be really careful with sometimes when we would, like, I always call it being a workout hero, would try to be a workout hero and crush some of these like on paper really impressive workouts. that would go all well and good for a certain number of weeks, and then I might start to see some breakdown. Aerobic, easy aerobic running, and lots of it was definitely my bread and butter, coupled with just the right amount of intensity. And again, that took some trial and error.
Okay. Yeah, what was the typical pattern on your team? Was it one, maybe two high intensity workouts a week, and then that had to be customized for you so that you wouldn't get stale off that amount of anaerobic work?
Yeah, we would do one like a Tuesday. A Tuesday was pretty much our staple like speed or quality session day. And then we would either do like a Thursday or Friday workout, or we do some quality work in our long run. So I found for me personally going above 2 workouts per week, again, whether that was, weekday quality work or a weekday session plus a harder long run. Two is definitely my sweet spot, and trying to do 3 days of intensity was that was kind of where I would start to run into trouble.
Now, this part of your story I'm not as familiar with. How has your relationship to running evolved since graduating from college?
It's evolved a lot, I would say. And it's something I've been reflecting on a lot as I've just had my second child. I'm super eager to get back into running. I wasn't able to run a ton this past pregnancy. So I'm thinking about the postpartum comeback, and it's really fresh and top of mind. I've thought about how much, like, coming out of college, I definitely, again, I was able to improve my senior year, not dramatically and not as much as I had hoped. And so I definitely graduated from college feeling like there was a lot more in the tank. I was hungry for more. And I spent some time kind of trying to chase those times and trying to kind of continue to train at a high level. And I think in hindsight, I needed to just chill out and take a break. I tell this to all young people graduating from college is it's such a massive life adjustment, um, coming out of college, especially coming out of college and being a D1 or a D2 or a D3 athlete. Like, it's been so much of your identity, and then you're just like dropped off into the real world, and it's this massive identity shift. So in hindsight, I wish I had taken some time to just kind of make that life adjustment and not put so much pressure on the running side of things. In my case, so I wanted to be a coach coming right out of college. So I went into the D1 running world. I was a volunteer assistant at Michigan State for a year. And that lifestyle was pretty crazy. I was also working at a gym, super early hours, opening at a gym from like, gosh, I think I worked from like 4:30 to 9 or something like that, or 12 some days. And then I go into the office at Michigan State and work there the rest of the day. And I get home and I'd be absolutely fried. Um, so needless to say, personal running goals did not happen that year. Um, and I got a few years after that, I got married, start having kids. So I haven't really had an opportunity since then to chase after, to kind of, continue with what I had hoped to do when I graduated college, and continue chasing after some of those goals. Definitely want to continue doing that now. But in that process, it has taught me that running is not everything. Running is a part of my life, and it's a really important for me part of my life. But running should always add and enrich your life versus, being kind of the center of things. So I think now having a family has definitely given me a healthy dose, and, you know, maybe trying to force running and force some of those goals in the past, it's definitely given me kind of a healthy dose of perspective.
Yeah, so after college, you you got into coaching, you decided shortly thereafter to start a family. And do you envision yourself when you think about the next 5 years down the road? Are you going to attack the sport from a competitive standpoint? Are you going to be training in a structured manner to go after some of those old personal bests of yours? Is that going to be your attitude?
Yeah, for sure. I will all of those things. But again, with just like I think like a healthier coming at it from like a healthier angle and perspective. I mean, I'm not like my life does look differently now. And this is actually something I work a lot with working with adult runners is, you know, everyone has jobs, regardless of whether they have a family or not. They all have jobs, they all have like lives and lots of commitments outside of running, right? So running is no longer looks the same as when you're, a college athlete and you're living, eating, breathing, sleeping the sport. So I'm excited to see what I can do with, I will have more demands on my time, but I'm excited to see what I can also do from just what I feel like is a little bit of a healthier um, mindset. At the end of the day, race well or race terrible, I'm coming home to my family. My kids will give me a big hug. You know what I mean? Like that stuff excites me and is refreshing. But yeah, I definitely have big goals. I'm definitely ready to attack them. Um, strength training is something I'm super passionate about, and is something that I've learned so much in since I've graduated from college. I think the field and the body of knowledge out there on strength training for runners has really evolved since I've graduated from college as well. I feel like that's a big piece that I'll have in my comeback, just being so much physically stronger than I was as a high school and college athlete. But also putting all the pieces together. I just hired a sports dietitian to help me make sure that nutritionally, as I'm coming back into running, I'm doing everything I can. And of course, now I have, having coached for so many years, I have so much more knowledge about proper training and education. I'm excited to kind of put that all together.
Yeah, you have such a good perspective, and yes, balance is the name of the game. What I'd like to talk about now is your earliest coaching experiences. Like you said, since high school, you have been this student of the sport, absorbing as much as you can. And so naturally, you found your way into different coaching roles over time. When did the thought of coaching as a possible career begin to materialize for you?
As a possible career, I would say my junior year of college. So I was a psych major in college. I came in undecided. I had no idea what I wanted to do. um, and then I started taking special interest in psychology. Um, Over time, I started gravitating like anything sports. My school didn't have a specific like sports psychology concentration, but I took every sports psychology class they had. Every research project was centered around sports psychology. Like I knew that was an area and a focus I was really interested in. I ended up doing my big senior research project and thesis on a sports psychology related topic. Um, so as I developed an interest towards that, I think that was when I first started to consider the idea of coaching post college, like as a career. And then I really set that goal for myself as a junior. Coming out of my junior year, the summer after my junior year, I did an internship at the Olympic Training Center out in San Diego, Chula Vista. And then once I graduated from college, I did an internship with ZAP, a running team down in North Carolina, and that was an incredible experience. And then I wanted to get into the college coaching pipeline. So I sought out a volunteer. You typically have to start as a volunteer. I got a volunteer assistantship at Michigan State. I just wanted to learn from the best people that I could. And they had just come off of Walt Drenth, the longtime head coach there who just retired. They had just won, their women's team had won cross country NCAAs the year before. So he was an amazing person, and the assistant coaches there were amazing to learn from. But that was how the path kind of formed.
Wow, is there anything that jumps out to you? Because you just mentioned there, your time at Michigan State, Walt Drenth, your time with Zap, and I interviewed Coach Pete a few episodes back, as your time at the National Olympic Training Center. Is there anything that the rest of us could maybe learn from your experience in those places?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say what stands out to me the most is that like the highest performers in our sports is and again, this is like something that's informing my comeback or me now, postpartum as a mom trying to go and chase after some of my running goals. Um, the highest performers, they put all the pieces together. It's about so much more than just like perfect training doesn't lead to PRs. It's about dialing into nutrition. It's about dialing into mindset and sports psychology. It's about strength training, building your body up so you can stay physically resilient enough to handle the training. So yeah, just seeing that was something I saw over and over again with the women at Michigan State, that amazing high performing team coming off the national championships, and the professional runners at ZAP, and the, amazing talented folks at the Olympic Training Center. Is they, again, it's so much more than just training. It's you have to kind of put all of the pieces together.
Right. Yeah, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us about your online coaching business and why you chose to go into private coaching.
Yeah, so again, coming out of college, I wanted to go down the college coaching pipeline. That was my big dream. I was all in. I was super passionate about it, and it's a tough lifestyle. I realized pretty quickly it's a 24/7 lifestyle, and what I was staring down was, I knew at some point I wanted to have a family. I didn't want to move around a ton, which is something that unfortunately have to do often early on in your career in the college coaching world. Kind of chasing different positions and just taking opportunities as they come. I didn't want to have to uproot myself and potentially my family so many times. Um, and so after my year at Michigan State, I went back, just kind of refocused. I took a job in the corporate world in marketing, which actually is very helpful to now what I do running an online business. But the bug never left. So I was fortunate enough I met at a just random off chance at an event that I was at. I met Mary Johnson of Live Run Perform, who owns a great online coaching business. Got chatting with her and ended up messaging her after the event and saying like, "Hey, you would never consider like taking on another coach, would you?" And she said yes. I started with just a very, very small handful of clients, never had any intention of leaving my full-time corporate job. Never thought that I could make this into, a full career, but it was so fulfilling to me. It reminded me of all the things I loved about coaching and, again, what I wanted to do coming out of college. My roster slowly grew. Word of mouth from my initial clients grew. And then I got to a point where I started thinking like, hey, I could potentially grow a full-time roster, and I could potentially, make a legitimate business out of this and leave my job. And I did, and I coached, left my corporate job maybe a year and a half, 2 years after I started online coaching. Was full-time with Live Run Perform, and then January of this past year, I branched out on my own, founded Coach Montana Depasquale. And it's been a great ride. I've got a great full roster of clients all around the country, all around the world. I work with I have a bunch of strength training offerings as well, because that's something I'm super passionate about, and I've got some fun things on the docket for 2023 as well.
So I've got to ask you about strength training later because I'm hearing over and over again that this is a big passion of yours. So we're going to get there. But putting aside training related mistakes, what mistakes have you made as a coach on the business side, or what lessons have you learned working in the service industry and sharpening your interpersonal skills, which, in my opinion, is 90% of what makes a great coach?
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah, so I would say, I mean, I've learned so much, especially in this first year of business. I had a full-time roster at this point last year when I was full-time with Live Run Perform. And I had all my ducks in a row and was super organized when I decided to make that launch and found my own business. And I would say it was still like a huge adjustment. And there were periods where I felt like I was kind of like drinking out of a fire hose. So I've learned so much I'm approaching the end of my first full year in business. Um, Learned so many good things. There's definitely some things I would have done differently. Um, but yeah, from business perspective, I would say it's just, as an entrepreneur, like the work never ends and there's always more work to do. So I would say maybe considering adding help in sooner. Um, looking back in hindsight. But from an interpersonal standpoint, I've learned so much from my athletes, and probably the biggest thing is learning to listen. Like, just another coach that I was chatting with the other day said it so well, just like learning as a coach to shut up and listen to your athlete. Not that I wasn't doing that before, but there's so much value in, even if like you maybe, I mean, anything they tell me, any of their experiences are valid and I take that into consideration. But even if like there's so much value in hearing an athlete, for example, debrief their race and debrief their training cycle. And even if I might disagree or have like a different perspective or take, there's so much value in hearing why they feel that, because then you learn like what they feel they need to succeed, which is half the battle. Learning what they need to feel confident, learning maybe what they don't understand about training. And that's a great educational opportunity. So, I can't say enough about building a great rapport with athletes. And I will say I have been really fortunate. I've had folks that I've been working with for like 4 years now since I first started coaching. And those are some of the most fun athletes to coach because again, we have that rapport. It's been so many seasons now of debriefing and recapping and getting to know them better, what makes them tick, etc. But just setting that precedent early, I think is so important.
Absolutely. And what about the sport psych side of things? Like being the motivator and holding your clients accountable, tailoring your approach to the personality of the individual and their lifestyle while remaining faithful to what you believe in. And maybe sometimes that means serving a reality check when you have to be truthful, right? Does any of that strike a chord with you?
Yeah, totally. So I think of a couple things. So one, and this was something that another coach helped me kind of put in perspective and gave me something to think about. So, like at one point, I forget, I think it was at some point last year or the year before, I had an athlete who they had an awesome marathon build. And as we know as coaches, the marathon, you know, it can be amazing or it can break your heart because we only get so many racing opportunities. You pour so much of yourself into a, 16 to 20 week most likely build and you get one shot and that's it for a while. You can only safely or what I would recommend run a certain number of marathons per year. So I had an athlete who ran an awesome build up, was so jazzed for her, and she got terrible weather on race day. It was super hot, and it's unfortunate, she didn't get to see the full fruits of her labor. And she wanted to put that fitness into another race soon after and do like a quick turnaround and try to do a back-to-back marathon to see if she could get some of the fruits of the training cycle labor. And I had a strong opinion about like as a coach from like a physiological standpoint and knowing everything I know, I had a strong opinion. And she had a different opinion and she was invested in it and she was emotional about it. And um I kind of felt like a little bit of that tug of war. And another coach said to me, as I was asking him for advice, and he said, our job as coaches is not to tell them what to do. Our job is to like guide them and lead them like as, as gently as possible. And then they have to choose what they want to do. And whether it goes poorly or well, that's on them. But our job or goal as a coach is just to set them up as best as we possibly can, to educate them as best as we possibly can on both the potential risks versus the potential rewards. And that's what I did with this particular athlete. And it gave me so much peace versus, trying to kind of like force, not that I would force my own beliefs on her, but, versus kind of trying to like approach it from like an attacking of like, this is the right way, or this is what you should be doing. I allowed her to come to her own conclusion. And that experience has shaped me a lot as a coach.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about some of your previous coaches, and I've also heard you say that you talk to other coaches right now and they offer you advice. Are there any mentors that you have right now, and you don't have to mention them by name, but stuff that they're teaching you, or let me put it another way, what is the best source of continuing education for you as a coach to stay up to date on all the literature and to prompt you to rethink what works and maybe what works even better?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, that's something that I'm always striving to connect with other coaches. I find so much value in just, and I wish there was like a better way to do it. I think, or I wish there was a better like platform or way to get groups of coaches together. I've gotten a lot of value from Chris Johnson's the Runner Zone group. That discovering that was great because there's so many great coaches and clinicians there. But I've also had just a lot of like organic networking and conversations with other coaches through social media. That's been a great way that I found other coaches and then, had naturally, conversations have emerged from those relationships. But yeah, I find so much value in chatting with other people. It's rare to get to talk to other, it's such a niche thing that we do. You can't talk with the average person on the streets about, they don't want to hear about your run coaching. Um, but it's nice to be able to talk to people who do what we do. And I've found so much value in hearing about different scenarios that they've maybe found themselves in with athletes they've worked with, or different pain points or struggles, and then just the opportunity to bounce ideas off each other. Um, so yeah, I would say social media has been a great um, medium for that, but Chris Johnson's group as well.
Yeah, I love bouncing ideas off other coaches. Obviously, it's the reason why I started this podcast, and it's been a true blessing.
Yeah.
When discussing training with an athlete, and now I want to get into your training philosophy.
Mm.
Let's say you're on a call and someone wants to know about your training philosophy. How do you start to unpack that? Because there's a million places we can start, but every coach seems to come through a different door, if you will. Where do we begin?
The The first thing I typically say is that I'm very much like no one size fits all. I don't work with any training templates. I don't have any kind of training or programming templates. I do everything from scratch depending on the person. Of course, there's overlap, and I have favorite workouts or workouts that I really like and that are my go-tos, and different folks will do some of the same workouts at some point over their build up, most likely if they're training for the same distance. Um, and it's a big reason why I've been hesitant to it's a big reason why one-on-one coaching is like the bread and butter of my business and always will be. And I've been really hesitant to create like static for sale training programs, because I love the investigative work of getting to know a person, just like we were talking about, the relationship building, knowing what makes them tick, hearing more about their lifetime training history. So it's like a puzzle trying to figure out, what might this person need to continue to progress. Of course, if they're a beginner, it might be just like getting them training consistently. But if they have any kind of running experience, it's looking at what they've done at the past, how satisfied they are with their results. So if they're like, hey, I have been able to see progress and I've been really pleased with that, but I just want to see more progress. Okay, then maybe it's a little bit of a, linear progression off of what they've been doing. If they've been, trying to improve for X number of years and nothing's been working, then it's, maybe we just kind of, start from scratch here, and it allows them to kind of come into my own training approach and philosophy. But yeah, the biggest thing for me is no one size fits all. I've done my best to educate myself on all the big, great coaches out there and all these different philosophies that, some people see as kind of like polarizing in our sport. And I treat it as like a menu, a little bit here, a little bit there, depending on the person and what I feel like they might need.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I would like to ask you about threshold training because that's one of my um, favorite things to program, favorite things to talk about. And for me, threshold training is like zone two in a three zone model.
Mm.
Um, so, are you a big believer in threshold training to the extent that when you analyze the amount of time your runners spend in the heavy domain up to and including LT2, does it outweigh the amount of time that they spend in the severe domain or zone three in a three zone model? In contrast to the polarized model of training, where they spend more time in the severe domain than they spend in the moderate domain or the heavy domain. Sorry.
I'm a big threshold pace is a big bread and butter for me. pretty much everyone's I have pretty much everyone do a good amount of work in threshold pace. Again, it's all dependent on kind of where they're coming from, whether they're a brand new beginner runner or there's someone who's been training for a long time. But that is, yeah, increasing the amount of time at threshold pace is a big bread and butter and a big priority for so many of my runners, and we've gotten great results from it.
Okay. And maybe an example of a typical threshold session for your runners, either in the base phase or somewhere in the middle towards the end, whatever you like, just to flesh things out for our listeners.
Yeah, so I like doing broken tempo runs. Or threshold pace fartleks, like I mean like someone just starting out, maybe start them with like 5 by 3 minutes at threshold pace with like a 1 minute recovery jog in between. And then just increasing the duration of the threshold pace rep, increasing the duration of the threshold paced reps, and then also increasing total time spent at threshold pace. And then some of my more advanced runners, getting them doing some longer, just continuous threshold runs, especially as they get stronger. I mean, that has been, if I get someone who can handle, you know, a good amount of a good like a longer tempo run at threshold pace continuous, that's typically when that person's, we've gotten them super strong, they're rolling and firing on all cylinders, and seeing a lot of progress in their other training paces and intensities as well.
Yeah. The reason I ask and I bring this up is because polarized training is so popular nowadays, or at least it's in vogue. It's being talked about on every social media post, it seems. But we can't forget that there is that zone of that intensity that yields big adaptations if you're training right under that anaerobic threshold, which a lot of people will call the gray zone. Obviously, you don't want to do that on a recovery day,
Yeah.
but if you add up all the time that you're spending in that zone throughout the week, I think it should outweigh your high intensity work, which actually puts you in a more pyramidal style of training instead of polarized. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, I've had folks that that's worked really well for, and that's definitely I personally, as a coach, I don't use like the extreme of polarized training. I would say I'm probably kind of like somewhere in between, again, like really prioritizing time spent at threshold pace. When I think of polarized training, something I see kind of as you were alluding to is so many people just training like they don't have any kind of structure to their training. They're going out every day and like either running hard or running at like a moderately hard effort. And so they benefit in a big way from slowing way down on their easy days and just being more intentional about their um quality session days, and making sure there's not, again, every day is not a quality session day or a quality day. But yeah, I touch on threshold pace as a big bread and butter, but I like to see a variety in the different types of work that we are doing and touching on a bunch of different speeds.
I agree, totally agree. And I'm very interested in hearing how much interest you get from clients wanting to book a power hour versus one-to-one coaching. And maybe you can start by explaining to our audience what a power hour is.
Yeah, so that's been a new offering of mine. I've had so much fun with them. I mean, first of all, my one-on-one roster is full at the moment, so I'm just at my capacity. I might have some spots opening up soon, but at the moment I'm full. So the power hours is a great way to get to meet other folks and help other folks and give them a chance to work with me if they want to work with me. But it's also I'll start by saying what the service is. So it's a 1 hour Zoom call with me. We do a deep dive into who they are, what their past training has looked like, what their current pain points are in their training, so what they're struggling with. And then I send them away with a big Google Doc, a ton of follow-up info, essentially me as like the third party running coach looking at and auditing their training and saying, here's where I think you're going to benefit from spending most of your time. Here's the path forward that I would recommend for you. And then I do send those folks away with a custom 6 to 8 week training plan to just kind of get them started. And that's something that, unlike one-on-one run coaching, that's something they just kind of run with that themselves versus getting that ongoing support that my one-on-one folks get. Although I do always tell my power hour folks, feel free to email me anytime you need. But yeah, benefit of the power hours is just getting to see so many different types of folks and what they're struggling with, and getting more people on the path to proper smart training. Did that answer your question, or did I just ramble?
No, perfect, perfect. And that gives me an idea. This is the first time I've utilized this approach as a proxy to talking about training on the podcast. But what if we were to model a typical power hour session using me
Mhm.
as your training subject? So I've booked my session with you, and it obviously it's not going to be an hour long, but how would you lead me through the process? And maybe I have to start by explaining what my current training is, and then what recommendations you would make for me, since we have the data, it's my data.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would start by just data collection initially. So I do, and I may one thing I'm toying with for 2023 is making that Power Hour initial form more robust, just getting some more initial info on them. We typically I lay that background on the call, and that'll be a bunch of like, say the first 15, 20 minutes or so of the call is just having just again me shutting up and listening, and them talking, telling me about their lifestyle, what other demands they have on their time, talking about their training history, talking about their recent training, and then talking about their goals. And then I essentially try to bridge the gap between their current training and their goals. But yeah, initial, just getting a bunch of data collection. My mind is turning as they're talking. I'm jotting down notes. And then I kind of talk them through where I think is going to be the best use of their time. I let them know exactly what I'm going to be following up with them on, all the info I'm going to be sending over, and kind of sketch out kind of like a high level idea of like what their custom training program would look like in terms of, I think that you're going to benefit from decreasing the amount of quality days you're currently doing per week, or increasing the amount of quality days, or increasing overall volume. That's kind of a typical session.
Okay. All right. So let's give the audience an example.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm training 7 days a week. I'm running 7 days a week.
Okay.
I'm doing one of those runs at 7:40 pace.
Okay.
I'm doing 3 by 6 minutes at 7:40 pace with just a minute recovery
Okay.
in between. So like a kind of like a threshold stimulus for me, very short recovery in between the reps at a 7:40 pace. And everything I do is on the treadmill because, well, long story short, I've been injured and I'm still coming back from that. I've got some health problems that I'm working through. So I do all my work on the treadmill. The other quality run I do is a 3 by 4 minute session at 6:30 pace, which is right around my 5K pace currently, and I take a 4 minute break in between those reps. So everything adds up to 30 minutes, and then just the other days, what I'm doing is 30 minutes easy on the treadmill at a 9:40 pace.
Okay.
So if that's my starting point, in simple terms, because I know you don't have the chance to really think about this in advance, but where would you suggest I move? In what direction should I move?
So I would definitely want some more background info, and I read your newsletter, so I'm familiar a little bit with some of your background, but could use a refresher. So what injury are you nursing currently?
I'm looking for a diagnosis. This is 2 years now in the making, where I had some back pain, I had some SI joint pain. I've gone to 4 doctors, I don't know how many PTs. No one can really pinpoint what the problem is, but I'm not so injured that I can't run, or I can do five. I can even race a 5K with minimal discomfort. Sometimes I actually don't feel anything during the race, which is probably all the adrenaline surging through the body. But yeah, my status is still up in the air. I know doing nothing is definitely not the answer, so I'm staying active. I have to keep running because as soon as I stop, everything tightens up.
Yeah. And what are your goals currently? What distance are you training for? A specific distance? Are you trying to move the needle in a certain, in a certain event?
I love the 5K, so I'm not looking to move up in distance. I've done marathons in the past, but I would like to and go back to the times that I used to be running in the 5K, because right now I'm just breaking 20 minutes in the 5K, but I'd like to go back to doing 17 minutes in the 5K. I'm just limited right now by my health issues, really. But for purposes of this discussion, maybe let's assume that I didn't have this health limitation. and you have someone that's just training 30 minutes a day, and they've got these 2 sessions of quality throughout the week, where would you start adding, or maybe subtract something and add something in its place?
Yeah. So again, I would have a bunch more. I would have a bunch more follow-up questions, but for the purposes of the exercise, I would definitely, if you're training 30 minutes a day, I think building the aerobic system is going to be such low-hanging fruit, and just seeing how much volume, just easy volume, we could get you to safely tolerate. Regardless of like, I know that you're injured, but or I know that you have an injury history, but even if I didn't know, everyone's going to have that upper limit of what they can tolerate. So slowly and incrementally increasing easy run volume to see what you can safely tolerate. I think you would see a lot of continued benefit there. Building up a long run if you aren't already. And I would potentially, like, depending on what I would glean from learning more about your lifetime training history, I would potentially think about cutting out that second quality session for now, maybe in favor of some like moderate, like steady pace running, like a little bit slower than marathon pace. Yeah. I would potentially cut out that second quality session day just to allow you to have greater capacity to build the aerobic system, and then layer back in that quality session at a later point in time. Knowing that hearing more about your injury history would definitely get you consistently strength training to increase your durability, see if that can move the needle with any of the symptoms you've been having, especially since you have tried so many other things and it seems to kind of still be mystifying, which I know how frustrating that is. I also recommend strength training for every runner. So would definitely want to have you add that in consistently. But yeah, I would say building the aerobic system, low hanging fruit, would probably be my first priority with you. And then looking at some more nuance in the quality work you are doing. So I think you said your second session was 6 by 3 minutes at about 5K pace effort with 4 minute recovery in between. Is that right?
Three by 4 minutes with 4 minute recovery.
Got it. Okay. Um, yeah. So that's, I mean, that's a solid session, but maybe making some tweaks or um, tinkering with some things there.
Yeah. But definitely the general theme is coming through, where if someone is training at such a low volume, relatively speaking, the next step, the lowest hanging fruit, would be to build some more volume into that, or more frequency even, because if you have someone that's just running 3 times a week, would you be trying to push them to 4 and then 5 times a week, right, to build that aerobic strength?
If they have the capacity, some people will, some people don't. So, and again, that's like the human side of training, right? Like if I have someone who is like, I work with a lot of busy moms and they have 4 days a week that they can run, and they can't, they don't have any more time than that. Like 4 days a week is what they can realistically be running. So let's say they are currently running 3 days a week, or let's say they're trying to run 4 days a week, but they're being inconsistent. Well, first step is going to get them, what can we do to get you consistently running 4 days a week and feeling good at that? Or if they're running 3 days per week, getting them consistently running 4 days a week. So we're maxing out, the aerobic development potential that we have. Then maybe next we're slightly increasing the distances on those easy days, so that we're still increasing volume overall. But then from there, it's, finding out what other ways can we continue to elicit adaptation. So maybe that's playing around with intensity, or, intensity distribution and frequency of the intense work that we are doing.
All right. And for the low intensity work, let's say you have someone that runs a 3:30 marathon, and they're doing their easy runs at 8 minute pace. Is that a problem in your opinion? Would you be trying to slow that runner down some?
Yeah, most likely. Um, Most likely. I go by that's something that as a younger coach, I was very like kind of black and white with that stuff. So right, like we all have access to, like, I use the VDOT calculator to get a good gauge of, based on someone's, recent race result, best estimation of their current fitness, what roughly is a good easy pace range for them. And I used to be like black and white about that kind of stuff. And now I get a little bit more curious depending on the person, depending on whether I feel like, for example, their recent race result is actually a good estimate of their current fitness, or maybe they're underperforming in their races and, they may be able to tolerate a faster, easy pace because they just have a greater ceiling. I would get curious about what that, before placing my own judgment or thoughts on what is an appropriate easy pace, hearing more about what the actual effort of that pace feels like for them. So some through 30 marathoners, 8-minute pace on their easy days is definitely going to be too fast. For other folks, it might be appropriate. The conversation test, I always tell people, as boring as it sounds, is one of the best gauges that we have. I personally don't deal a ton with heart rate. I think it can definitely be useful data, and I like to look at it from time to time, but I see heart rate data as, I just see people get way too fixated on it. We know that there's so much that affects heart rate and can make it so variable. So yeah, and climate is, living in Orlando, my runners in the South, every year we have a conversation about why their heart rate is so high in the summer and during the really, really hot and humid months. But yeah, effort is one of the best gauges we have for easy days. So I tell people, if you can't call up a friend on your run and have a fairly comfortable conversation with them on your easy days, like if you can just get out a word or two at a time and you're huffing in between those words, you're running too fast. You need to slow down.
Yeah, effort is always the guiding light. Although I like to give them a number, a speed limit, because a lot of runners are just not honest with themselves, and they'll say to me, "Yeah, that felt easy." And sure, I could talk, but physiologically, I know that they're above 65% of their VVO2 max, and they're not really recovering at that pace. So I like to give them more than just a feel. I like to give them the feel. I like to give them a number to gauge themselves off of as well.
I do as well. Yeah. I always give them a pace range. And I have had quite a few people in that same boat. They're like, no, I promise I'm easy. I'm like, I think we need to. But honestly, I mean, there's a great coaching lesson in there, is a lot of people's perception of easy is skewed, depending on what style of training they're coming from. Like if you've been running your easy days way too fast for years, your body is just, you condition your body to think that's easy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is easier, though. That's what the smart easy pace is for you. I always give people a range and I always give people a range of what I want them training at on their easy days. But if I do have a situation where, like, sometimes I'll get to a point where either their fitness is improving or something else is going on. Again, like maybe this person has just, like, what we were using as their fitness indicator wasn't a really good fitness indicator. And they're quicker than we think. I have had scenarios where people are very truly comfortably running at quicker than I would on paper have them running. And that's where we do a little bit more investigative work.
And what about the runner that comes to you from a Galloway method background? So let's just say that they're running 3, 4 days a week, like that busy mom we alluded to earlier, and she is accustomed to 3-1 run walk intervals, and she wants to, let's say, run a half marathon 4 months from now. What levers are you going to pull there, and maybe in what order, if you want to help them run the best? So let's assume that performance is the goal, not just crossing the finish line.
Yep. So is this person, theoretically, are they trying to complete the distance running or run walking?
Well, they would like to, they would like to learn how to get, maybe drop some of the walking that they're doing and learn how to run um, without as many walk breaks.
Yeah. So I would use a natural progression. I would just aim to progress, to get them, first of all, making sure that they are, a lot of the run walkers I work with are, like, they think because they have the walk breaks in between that, they're like going way too hard on their running portion. So making sure that effort is appropriate, that's going to be a big uh, tool that's going to allow us to progress and for them to eventually be able to handle more running. So making sure the effort on the run intervals is appropriately easy, and then slowly just building up total volume, increasing, and again, most people have a personal max, right? Like we can't progress people to where they're running 2 hours a day every day. So working up to whatever their daily limits are of increasing total running volume, gradually increasing the lengths of the run intervals, and yeah, over time, seeing if we can kind of wean them off of the walk intervals, even if it's 1 to 2 days a week to start. And then layering in speed at some point, which can be while they're still doing run walk intervals or once we've gotten them to a point where they are continuously running.
I agree with you. That's well said. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I feel that many recreational runners just want to keep racing the marathon, and then they wonder why they can't break 5 hours or 4 hours, for example. So, what training interventions can help that runner tap into the neuromuscular system and recruit more fast twitch muscle fiber?
Spending time away from the marathon. Yeah, and that's I push everyone to I have a lot of like serial marathoners as I call it, which I get it. The marathon is so fun. I work with, a lot of people that's their main goal. That's the event that they love. I say the word 5K and they start to like tremble and sweat. Um, but yeah, I have folks who just want to run 2 to 3 marathons a year every single year. And I really push them at some point to spend some time away from the marathon, working on, whether it's top end speed or just working on some different training focuses, anything from a 5K, 10K cycle, a half marathon cycle. I have some folks who even drop down to the mile and do like a true speed focus cycle. But that is, yeah, especially if I have someone who, like, let's say their goal is breaking 5 hours or breaking 4 hours, and they just like keep ramming their head against this goal, like they're running the same time over and over again, or the same time within like a 5-minute buffer. It's like, okay, now it's that's a big red flag to me, or a big flag that we need to spend some time at a different distance.
Yeah, yeah. And just sharing ideas here, that's the reason why my marathon training cycles are so long. Like I don't do 10, 12 week marathon cycles. They're because I like to build in a 5K, 10K training block into the initial phase of training for a marathoner. So they're coming off 5K, 10K training into their marathon specific work. And you can still do 2 good marathons a year on that kind of a rotation.
Oh, that's really interesting. I like that. I'd not thought about combining the two, but that's neat. I typically have some type of tune up race or a series of tune up races within the marathon buildup. And I like seeing folks, I like for example, using a well-timed half marathon in there. Um, and seeing folks be able to do well at both distances over the course of the same cycle.
So I promised we would get to the strength training. Strength training for distance runners. What exercises should we be doing? How often? How do you periodize it into the training plan? You name it. Where should we begin?
Yeah, so strength training is another one of those things that I find most runners hear strength training, or they're told to pick up weights and they start to like tremble and break out into a cold sweat. Um, and one thing I found is there's just especially now, there's more and more research that overwhelmingly points to, like, it's so well studied, the benefits of heavy strength training, a certain type of strength training for runners. It improves outright performance. It improves running economy. It decreases the risk of injury. And I always say, like, I like to have people lifting and strength training consistently just from like a life perspective, like allowing them to be a healthy, independent person for ideally as long as possible. Is, we all lose bone mass as we age, especially women. We all lose muscle mass as we age after the age of 30, which is not old. So it can be, strength training will allow us to hang on to that, or allow us to potentially reverse some of that age-related decline. And it protects against all causes mortality. So it helps us to avoid falls and other risks and injuries and things as we get older. So I'm a big proponent of strength training for all of those reasons. Research does show that strength training, to get all the benefits, it needs to be heavy. And I see a lot of coaches who if they do, if we get them to the point where they are embracing strength training, which yay, that excites me. A lot of them are doing they're doing circuit training, or they're doing high reps, very low weights, stuff that is not gonna it's gonna make the athlete tired. It's not necessarily gonna make them a better runner. So bridging that gap of getting them strength training in the first place, but also doing the strength training that we know is going to elicit all the adaptations and benefits that we want. They need to actually be challenging themselves with weights. And research shows that we want like a roughly 8 out of 10 RPE of weights used. And that's a great gauge that I like to give my runners is I say you should be able to complete about 2 to 3 more reps before, you're unable to stand up from a squat position, or you're, able to get the weights over your head without form completely breaking down. But you shouldn't be able to do 5 to 10 more reps with the weights. And if you do, you need to increase. In terms of specific exercises, things I like to focus on, running is obviously a single leg activity. So a lot of single leg work, a lot of more and more based on research and things I'm learning, prioritizing lower leg strength training, especially like calf specific strength training more and more. But also the foundation is getting all of those big prime mover muscles strong, getting the glutes strong, getting the quads and hamstrings strong. Those are our powerhouses in running. So doing those big like compound movements is always going to be the targets those muscle groups is always going to be like our bread and butter. And then the rest of the stuff is sprinkled in. Oh, and moving laterally too, because, as runners, we're moving in the same plane of motion. I do like to have runners moving in all the different planes and moving in different directions.
Yeah, I love how you said all that. We need to focus on max strength in the gym. So that means heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, and including the single leg variations of those. And what about explosive or reactive strength? That's usually what I do towards the end of a strength training cycle. After we've done our max lifting and we've done some mobility work closer to the race, we'll do like plyometrics.
Yeah.
Do you incorporate that into your plans as well?
So I have a very, very small handful of in-person strength training clients. My business is primarily online, and I'm moving more and more towards having everything online. So for my online clients, I don't do a ton of that specific work because I like to have that type of work closely supervised. And you're going to have a higher risk of injury. It's important. I love having people incorporate power work and plyometric work. And the research again there is, shows very clearly that it leads to improved performance. But again, that is something that I like to have closely supervised, because people trying to do this on their own with poor form there's going to be a very high risk of injury involved. So in a situation where I can control and help and guide and lead the person towards implementing those exercises or type of exercises safely, definitely a big fan.
And last thing on strength training, Montana, is there a place for just body weight exercises? And even if you have access to a gym or home equipment, is there a time and place for someone to just do mobility work or just jump squats?
Yep. Yeah, so like jump squats, like a plyometric type activity at that, I mean, you can get a lot of benefit just from doing that body weight. Definitely a time and a place for body weight, all depends on the person. So I work with people who, I think pretty much every healthy adult can start with using weights. But if you're someone who has never done formal strength training and are super weak, you will likely be able to see good benefit just from doing body weight stuff initially. I also always tell people that something is always better than nothing. So even if you are someone who's accustomed to lifting weights and can lift even like fairly heavy weights, if you're, say, traveling and don't have access to a gym, like doing something consistently will likely yield you some benefit. So don't get, caught in the all or nothing trap. But the people who start with body weight only training, I do like to see those people progress to eventually using weights. It's like anything else, at some point you're not going to see continued benefit from, you need to find a way to progress the stimulus, which will be picking up weights and then eventually picking up heavier and heavier weights. And for those people, as we progress them from body weight to picking up weights, a lot of those same exercises that may have yielded you adaptations as just like true strength exercises in the beginning, those I typically make them like those can become part of your warm up. So you're still using some of those exercises, but that's now your warm up. And then the main body of your strength exercises are, you know, movements with weights that are loaded up.
Awesome. I love it. Is there anything I left out in this training discussion or anything coaching related today that you would like to expound upon, or just something I didn't ask you that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I don't think so. This has been a fun conversation. We've touched on so many different topics, and I really appreciate you taking the time and inviting me to be on.
If you don't mind, I'd like to finish every episode with a little rapid fire segment. So just about 5 or 6 of these, and the goal is to answer in a sentence or less.
Sounds great.
What is your favorite meal or recipe before or after a run?
Oh, um, before a run, I love lately I've been loving my stroop waffles, my honey stingers. After a run, I love breakfast all time of day. Doesn't matter what time I've run. So a good brunch or breakfast for dinner or feast. Um, very good.
Your favorite type of workout if you could only prescribe one type of workout to your athletes?
Mile repeats. I love them. I know it's controversial. A lot of athletes don't enjoy them. I love them as an athlete and I love using them as a coach. And there's so many ways to take a simple workout and do them differently depending on the intensity you're having them run, the amount of them, and the rest in between.
Your favorite form of cross training?
Lifting, strength training.
Your favorite racing distance and why?
I love the 10K on the track, just because it holds nostalgia for me. I love that event in college, would love to get back to it and race it at a high level, hopefully at some point again. Um, I would say for me, 10K on the track.
Yeah. Well, those are hard to come by as an open runner, right? After college, I'd have trouble finding some here in Florida. Maybe not so much in Rhode Island.
Yeah. Yeah, they are harder to come by. I would say close second. The marathon for sure is a close second. But there's something special about I love getting on the track, period.
Your favorite runner, race, or moment in athletics history?
Oh, I had the privilege of seeing David Rudisha run the 800 meter world record at the London Olympics live, and that was pretty incredible. Obviously I'm a distance athlete, but I love watching the middle distance races because they have the most beautiful, flawless, impeccable form. They have amazing power from they're just incredible middle distance runners are incredible athletes. So that was just start to finish, just an amazing event, an amazing runner in action.
Incredible. What a neat little piece of trivia. I would have never guessed that you were there in person when David Rudisha won wire to wire in 2012 in 140. No one's even come close since then.
He's very fun to watch. He's just like a commanding, like he's so tall. And again, he's got just beautiful, like as a running coach, I appreciate beautiful mechanics. So yeah, seeing him go wire to wire, like that was a wow.
And lastly, what's a book, a blog, a website, a podcast? You can't say SteadFast Running, a clinic that has been a great source of learning for you personally.
Um, well, I mean, everyone loves Once a Runner. That was a huge, that's fiction. But a book that really instilled my love of running from, I remember reading that for the first time in high school. I read it probably half a dozen times since then. Um, and yeah, I would say that would be my work of fiction. And then nonfiction, I love reading the work of Lydiard.
Absolutely, Arthur Lydiard, a legend. So, Montana, this has been a great conversation. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Via social media, I'm Coach Montana Depasquale on Instagram, and my website is www.coachmontanadepasquale.com. Those are the best ways to get in touch, and I thank you so much for having me.
I'll include links to that in the show notes. Thank you again for sharing your story. I really enjoyed our talk. And so for Montana Depasquale, I'm Jonathan Mederos, reminding everyone that our sport is nothing if it doesn't make you feel good. That's the whole point. So don't take it for granted. Love what you do. And if you play it smart, you can do it for a really long time. And that's winning. Till next time.